Declaring attributes in a DTD is accomplished in much the same fashion as declaring elements. And all attributes that you're intending to use in a document that's going to be validated by a DTD have to be declared via an attribute list declaration. An attribute list declaration looks like this. It has an opening angle bracket with an exclamation point and the capital word @list, followed by the element name, the attribute name, and a default declaration, followed by a closing angle bracket. So the element name is the name of the element that you're defining the attribute to be used on. The attr name is the name of the attribute. The type is the attribute's type, and I'll get to those in a moment. And finally, there is the default declaration, which is in place of the default decl keyword there. And that's the default declaration for the attribute. It defines how the attribute behaves under default situations, and I'll get to that in a bit. The attribute type can be one of three types. There's the string type, which is indicated by the CData keyword, which is all capitals there. This means that the attribute can be any literal string, and you can just type in the value for the attribute. The enumerated type means that the attribute can come from one of several potential values, but any other value would result in an error. And then there's the tokenized type. The tokenized type is reserved for things like IDs and ID refs and other advanced features of DTDs. I'm not going to go deep into that here. I'm going to cover the string and enumerated types because, once again, these are by far the most common examples you'll run into when declaring DTDs in your XML files. The string type is declared like this. And in this example, we're declaring a status attribute for a package element. And in this case, it's a string attribute because of the CData keyword. And the default value is in the quotes there at the end, and it's defaulting to OK. So what this means is if you don't define the status attribute on an element in an XML file and you request the value of that attribute using the DOM API, it will still have the default value of OK, just as if you had typed it into the XML data and put it there yourself. Now, of course, because this is a string type and there's no other constraints on it, you could put other values in there as well, but this is a way of telling the XML processor that if a certain attribute is not included and there's a default value and someone asks for it, this is the value they should get back. An enumerated type looks like this. And in this case, we're defining an attribute for a dwelling element. And the type can be one of the following inside the parentheses separated by those vertical bar characters. That's pretty similar to how you define a choice type of element declaration. So in this case, the type attribute for the dwelling element can be either house or apartment or trailer. It can't be mobile home or condo. Those would result in an invalid attribute. The default declaration is a way of defining not just default values, but how the attribute should be viewed by the processor. And there's a couple of ways you can modify the default declaration. There's the required keyword, which means that the attribute has to be included in the XML data. There's the implied keyword, which is indicated by #implied. And in this case, the attribute for an element is optional. There's also the default value, which is the value to use for the default. And there's fixed, which means the value is fixed at a certain value. In this example, we have an attribute named onTime. And onTime is required, and it can either be yes or no. In this case, we have an onTime attribute, and it's either yes or no, and it's implied. In other words, the XML data may or may not contain it. In the third example here, the onTime attribute for the package element is character data, and it's fixed to the value of yes. If you put anything else in there, then that would be an error. Let's take what we've learned so far about elements and attributes and build a DTD for our business card example that we've been using throughout the course.